You're listening to the SIP podcast, the Study Abroadcast, episode 10. I'm your host, Emily. In this show, we explore the world of study abroad, offering advice, insights, and travel stories, bridging perspectives and cultures along the way. On this episode, we'll be speaking with a University of Guelph exchange student about their study abroad experience in Singapore. Let's get right into it. Today on the show, we are pleased to welcome Emily. To get started, Emily, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your exchange experience?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It's been definitely something I've never heard of before. So I'm really glad that this podcast is kind of starting up and, getting some perspectives on the exchange experience. So my name is Emily. I'm a fourth year international development student who is specializing in political economy, and I'm minoring in history. So that's a little bit about me and where I'm at Guelph. But I actually did my exchange when I was in second year, and I went to Singapore. So I lived there for 5 months and traveled in a lot of Southeast Asia. And while I was there, I was at the National University of Singapore. I think there are 3 universities on the island, so I was at one of the 3 there.
Some common exchange destinations have included the UK, France, and Australia. What drew you to Singapore?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I told people I was going to Singapore on exchange, it actually really surprised a lot of people that I told, because I think most people, when they hear the word exchange in university, they expect people to go to Australia, New Zealand, or somewhere in Europe. But CIP actually has like such a huge like variety of exchanges everywhere. So I was kind of just drawn to something that, this sounds terrible, but it was actually something that would be worth like my money, because I was thinking that I was going to be so far away. It would be better that I spent 5 months in a place that takes me like 25 hours to get to and come back from, rather than just go there for like a 2-week vacation or something. I knew like right away when I went into university that I wanted to take an exchange. And I have traveled a lot outside of university in Europe. So I was kind of like, you know what? I think I want to do something a little different. And I've always wanted to travel to Southeast Asia. And it kind of just seemed like the perfect opportunity for me to have an excuse to go there for 4 or 5 months. So it was definitely kind of like a bang for my buck sort of situation.
There are obviously some great attractions in Singapore: the Marina Bay, the Botanical Gardens, Universal Studios. Apart from these tourist attractions, what would be some of your travel recommendations for Singapore?
Yeah, so that's a really tough question, because the thing about Singapore is that it's really small, but it's jam-packed with things to do. And a lot of it is touristy, I will say. But other than the touristy attractions, there's just so many cultures going on in this one tiny little city that's like a country. And so I found that some of the things that I enjoyed the most were really mundane things in the city. But let's think of my highlights. I think the first one would be Changi Airport. So if you research Changi online, it comes up as like one of the like most expensive or like most, I don't know, bougie airports to go to. And for good reason. Like I have, no joke, spent an entire day in Changi. They have a whole bunch of tourist attractions inside of the airport. And they're really well known for the waterfall within the airport that they just made. I was actually in Singapore while they were constructing it, and then I was there one of my last weeks actually in Singapore. They fully opened the waterfall, so I got to see that, which was really cool. And obviously they have a whole bunch of like restaurants and really cool like seating areas that they've all decorated and made really nice. So I know it's weird to suggest an airport, but you always, if you ever go to Singapore, you always need to make sure you explore Changi, because there's a lot there. But other than that, some of the things I really liked were actually just different neighborhoods in town. So in the main city, there are different areas like Little India, Chinatown, and a couple of other or places where more of like ethnic groups kind of grouped together. But Little India was one of my favorite places within the city because the food there was just amazing. Like, and the amount that you would pay for like this huge sprawl of, pitas and naan and rice and all these really, really yummy things. It was just like my favorite place to go for lunch, even though it was like a 30-minute train ride into the city from the university. It was so worth it, in my opinion. So that was definitely a highlight. And then lastly, I know that people talk about it all the time, especially if you've ever seen Crazy Rich Asians, but there are these things called hawker centers, which are basically like street food markets in Singapore, and they just have some amazing food. I'm apparently only talking about food, but they have some amazing food there for super, super cheap. And it was a really great way to like eat my way around the city because they have quite a few. And yeah, those were kind of my highlights. But one of the other highlights that was definitely a thing was Sentosa, the beach island that is beside Singapore, is really close to my university. It was like a 15-minute bus ride away. So that was always nice to be able to go to too.
Yeah, that sounds really amazing. Food is definitely always one of the highlights of my travel experiences for sure. What was it like studying at the National University of Singapore? Was the teaching or learning style any different from what you were used to at the University of Guelph?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I actually found it really different, but I think it depends on what program you're in. So, because I'm in a lot of arts classes, so, writing lots of essays, doing lots of like reading assignments, most Guelph students know that a lot of teachers tend to have like weekly assignments, whether it's reading responses or seminar participation or whatever. But at NUS, it was very different. Like it was very much a highly academic setting where you would have your midterm, you would have your final paper, and you would have your exam, and that was it. So it was almost weird to me because I was expecting going in being like, this is what university is like, you're going to be busy the entire time doing these little assignments weekly, but that wasn't the case at all. So yeah, it was definitely very different, but I don't think in a necessarily a bad way. It's just a completely different way of doing school for an art student at Guelph. But I'm sure if you were in the sciences or something, it would kind of be similar where you do a couple of bigger assignments rather than many small ones. But in terms of like how the university ran, it, I would like to say that Guelph's profs are like the best on earth because I'm biased, but honestly, they had some amazing profs and really knowledgeable profs, especially in the history department and political science department, that really gave me an opportunity to learn about something completely different geographically. So a lot of history courses and polls courses focus on more of like the global south, of course, Southeast Asia, like Indonesia. So it was really interesting to be able to like have those be the mainstream history and political science courses rather than here, for example, when we focus a lot more on like Western studies and Europe and Scotland, we have our own geographical perspectives, but it was kind of cool to have a different perspective given by some really, really awesome profs.
In terms of culture, you moved to a country in Asia where you went from being in the majority culture to being in the minority culture. What was that transition like for you?
Yeah, so this is actually kind of a funny question because I know that as a white person moving into a predominantly Asian country, I was expecting to feel some culture shock. But Singapore is super urbanized. Like it literally is one city inside of a state. And because of that, Singapore is known as a business hub and the language of business is English. So in every street corner, all on the subway, everything, there were lots of things in Mandarin, but mostly everybody spoke English to some degree. Mandarin and English are like the two main languages. And I would say that the only places where, there was a real culture or language barrier between people that I was meeting would be people who were much older. because Singapore is like quite new to the whole, like not new, but they're, a new business industry kind of city. And so lots of the newer generations of people actually speak really fluent English. So I didn't really feel like I was a minority, and I feel like I was really lucky in that sense because I got to experience some really different cultures and foods and traditions, but also be able to enjoy it within my own home language, which was really, really special for me. And same with the university, like they teach a lot of their classes in English. Majority of them actually are in English, with a small exception being in foreign languages and then in Mandarin. It's a super interdisciplinary school and like super integrated school in terms of like there is a majority of Asian people living in Singapore and at the university. However, they're from a huge mix of different countries. So it's not like, it's all Chinese people or Thai people or Cambodian people. Like it's a huge mix of them, as well as some people from South Asia as well. So India, Bengal. So I never really felt like a minority because it was such a huge mix of people there, and English was being spoke most of the time. So I didn't feel excluded in many cases.
Were there any other apprehensions that you had or concerns your family or friends had expressed before you went abroad?
This was actually a pretty easy answer for me. I've traveled abroad several times before I was even in university. I used to travel when I was in high school as well in groups. So I actually didn't really have any stressful questions or like outstanding apprehensions that kind of pulled me back from doing the exchange. I knew that I wanted to go 100%. I wasn't sure where I was going to go, when I decided I wanted to do an exchange, but once it actually came to the time that my exchange had been confirmed, I think that all I could think of was how exciting it was going to be, because I love to travel. So honestly, I really didn't have any apprehensions. The only thing I can really say that was more of a concern for me was, well, because of course I was in first year, so I thought I had to graduate in 4 years. And because I was taking an exchange, there might have been some sort of, obstruction to me graduating in 4 years. Which now that I'm looking back on that did not matter at all. I'm going to be taking a fifth year and like I'm completely happy with that. So other than the effect that it would have on like my ability to finish my degree, that was the only thing that I was worried about. But I worked it out. I made every credit count as much as I could.
How did studying in Singapore expand your thoughts about the world?
Okay, so this is a really tough question because I feel like any exchange student that goes away, first, whether it be one semester or two, it's really hard to kind of discern all the things that you learned while on exchange because there's usually so much that's different, that's scary, that's awesome, that's kind of just like all jumbled into one big ball at the end. And sometimes it's kind of hard to pick apart the pieces and say, what did I learn about the world and what did I learn about myself that you're comfortable speaking as well. It can be really stressful. And I think that that's one thing, not just from this exchange, but from the international travel that I've done beforehand, just being able to step back, keep calm and just think through problems, because there's always a solution, and I think that it's actually really helped me in my life now, as a student, because I know that if I can think through something, in the middle of Vietnam where I don't speak any Vietnamese and I can still figure out a place to eat and sleep and whatever, I can figure out how to problem solve at university and in my regular life. I know that sounds really cliche and everything, but that's always the way that I've kind of thought about it coming home. I'm like, wow, if I needed to tackle something, I have a different perspective of looking at that problem, rather than just seeing it as like something to panic about. I've also found that my ability to cope when things change suddenly has also really grown since that, because you end up missing a flight because you're sick, or you end up stuck somewhere for a couple of days that you weren't really planning to, and you just have to learn to accept that stuff and really not get preoccupied and anxious over that, because in those situations there's really nothing you can do. And I think that it's really taught me the value of just understanding what you can and cannot control in your life, and then being able to do what you can to cope with what you can't control.
Are there any other tips or advice you would give to those students who really want to go abroad but are currently on the fence?
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing I can tell people who haven't been out traveling before, for a lot of people, an exchange is the first time that they get to go travel abroad and see a new place. And it can be really nerve-wracking and scary. I can remember the first time I traveled and it was like terrifying, right? But I think first and foremost, just know that it's going to be so amazing. Any reservations that you have about money, time, anything else that can be on your mind. In my opinion, traveling abroad is one of the most important parts of a person's life, to go and see other cultures and meet new people, see a different experience or experience a new perspective. Those are all really important parts of the kind of life we live now, because we're so interconnected with social media and everything. It's really important, at least in my view, to be able to go and see other places, and have a respect for different cultures around the world. So I think that if you have any reservations about, things holding you back, or people who think that you shouldn't be going, I would say go. I would say 100% it's going to be the best experience of your life. Especially, now that it's winter and it's really snowy. I miss Singapore so much. And yes, there were parts of the time that I didn't have an amazing time. Going on exchange every single day is not the perfect day. It's not a day in paradise. But the good days outweigh the bad days for sure. And for people who are worried about money, which was a concern for me as well, honestly, the way that I dealt with it was just by planning ahead. So when I was in first year and knew that I wanted to go into do an exchange, I knew that I wanted to put my money towards saving for an exchange. So over the summer and during the semester when I was working, that's kind of what my savings were focused on. But I also applied for scholarships and bursaries through CIP. And I think that there are some bursaries offered by the university as well, that I also applied for and received. So the options are there, and CIP was really helpful for helping me find those resources money-wise, and grant-wise, and pointing me in the right direction of finding that stuff. Yeah, the only thing I would say is that if there is an obstacle in your mind, in your wallet, in your heart about going on exchange, really take the time to think about what it is. Work on it within yourself if you need to. And then after that, try and find out how you can cope with those things and fix those things, because it's honestly a once in a lifetime opportunity, in my opinion.
That's some really great advice, Emily. Thank you for that. Well, that's all for today's episode of the Study ABROADcast. Don't forget to explore your own study abroad opportunities on the SIP website, uiguelph.ca/SIP, or follow us on Facebook or Instagram. Our Instagram handle is CIP_Guelph. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Emily for sharing their advice, insights, and travel stories. Stay tuned to our next episode where we look to unpack the study abroad experience even further.